Hi, my name is Tom Shooter. We're doing a day in the life of a service company using Business Central Service. I have been a consultant in the service industry in a variety of different softwares for more years than I care to remember, probably going on 35 to 40 now. Service Dynamics is a division of Sabre Limited. So what is Service Dynamics? Service Dynamics empowers companies to work better, work more efficiently, work smarter, and also provide more information for the customers that they're dealing with, helping the customers to effectively run the business as well. It's running on, as we said, on Microsoft Business Central, a lot of different industries. A couple that we've highlighted here are HVAC, electrical, industrial, and trade industries. It's focused on fixed fee projects, real results, and ongoing support. So in this day in the life, we're going to deal with three main people: Dora, the dispatcher, Thomas, the tech, and Sean, the service manager. So we're going to go through what they would see in a typical day dealing with the service product and dealing as they're going along in the day, dealing with their customers, the techs out in the field, what they would see and would allow them to update the calls. And Sean, and as the service manager, would be mostly reviewing the calls at the end after the tech is done and okaying the call if everything is correct or making adjustments if he needs to be. The first thing that Service Dynamics has is what's called service items. Every service call must have a service item. So a service item is something that you may have sold to the customer. It's something that they may have bought from somewhere else, but you are going to do the work on that. But in any event, you must have a service item. Service item is specific to a customer, but in the functionality of the service product, if the item changes for whatever reason, it could be assigned to a new customer. So basically here we have a order that Dora created. She's assigned this particular service item to it, which is a jacuzzi. And she will then be able to generate the service call. So I'm just going to go back to, if we look at a service item, because, what is a service item? So this is the main information that's on a service item. If you sold the service item to this particular customer, you can automatically create a service item. You can set it up based on the item that's in the inventory. So you may have certain items that you want to create an item for, but of course on other things you might not. If you were selling this jacuzzi, you'd like to create an item, but if you were selling a filter for this that costs $12, you probably don't want to set up a service item for that. And then, as I said, it's specific on an item by item basis. If what you sold them has serial number, the serial number will come over. Basically, you don't have to set the item up. If you sold it, the information is there. One of the things that can also be set up is warranty. So you can see in this case, we bought, in this example, it was sold on December 18th, and we supply a 1-year warranty. You can see that we can supply a warranty, but we can also supply a percentage on that warranty. So if you're offering a 1-year warranty with 100% on parts, this is how it would look. But if you were offering, say, 50% on parts, you could put in the 50%. When you're doing the service order, when you've done the work, the system will calculate based on the warranty if the warranty is still in place. You can even see that there is the ability to have a warranty on parts and a warranty on labor, and they could be different. I mean, and typically they're not, but they could be. It could be a 1-year warranty on parts, but a 6-month warranty on labor. And again, that could be a certain percentage. So parts could be 100, labor could be 50. One of the things that the system will do as it goes along and you start to create history is it will keep track of the costs for that particular service item. Now, in this case, we just created the service items, so there are no costs, but you can go and you can look at this information. You could get it in a detailed view too. We've just shown it in this one. Now, what could you do with this? Well, Dora at this point could start discussing options with the client, customer on the phone. Maybe the customer is also saying, I'm spending a lot of money on this particular item. Can you tell me how many support calls we've had in the last 2 years? Can you tell me how much it's been costing me? Dora might also be able to set up a possible contract situation. Service also has preventive maintenance contracts that we'll deal with a little while later. So she might say, if you do a preventive maintenance contract, we might be able to extend the life of your machine and we might be able to reduce downtimes. Another example is if you're always looking at a problem with a specific component, because items can have components as well. So the jacuzzi could be the item, and for this example, I'm just using a motor, could be a component. So you would approach the customer and you're talking to them, you say, it's always the motor that's causing us a problem. Why don't we do something with that? And why don't we replace the motor so that your jacuzzi will be up and running more effectively and you'll have less downtime? So this information we're giving Dora in her fingertips allows her to discuss logical things with the customer. And if the customer is upset, it also allows her to look back at the history and say, yes, we've been out there many times, but it's always been for something different. Or we've been out there, but you have 5 jacuzzis in your resort, and we've only worked on this jacuzzi once before. We allow, or service allows, the creation of a service contract. So what's a service contract? Well, a service contract, again, is something that covers a piece of equipment. Again, it can be a certain percentage or it can be, 100%. When you create a service contract, you can put in a site visit. So every 3 months, every 6 months, every 12 months, whatever you put in there, and then service can generate automatically a service call on that particular month for that particular item. It allows you to create those calls automatically, put them on your dispatch board, know that you need to deal with them, and allows you to make more effective plans. Also make sure you don't forget, if you're supposed to do regularly scheduled maintenance every 3 months, the worst thing that can happen is, for whatever reason, maybe you're using an Excel spreadsheet, you forget to put a call in there and it never gets done. And then the customer, of course, gets very upset. The other thing that it can do is it can do the billing for you. So let's say you have a contract that's such that you're covering a particular piece of product and they're paying you $1,200 a year. You could set your billings up to be whatever you want, monthly, bi-monthly, every 6 months, once a year. If you set it up monthly, you can automatically generate an invoice to that particular customer for that particular service contract at $100 a month. So again, you don't forget to bill the customer, because obviously billing the customer is equally as important as doing the work. Okay, so again, we're showing here, this is the service call that Dora has created for this particular customer, Alpine House. She's just put in the description that the pump is not working. All that other information is in there. There are different statuses that we'll talk about later. In this case, the status is set to pending. The other thing that Dora could do is she could create a service quote. So in other words, you don't have to start as a service order. You could do a service quote. Basically, it looks almost the same. You send the quote out to the customer. You say, we're estimating that this will cost $1,500. Customer can then say, okay, let's do it. You would then go in and you would change it from a service call to a service quote, and you would handle it the same way as anything else. We're also looking at a product called ExpandIT. ExpandIT is an app that connects onto Business Central Service. It allows Dora to talk to Thomas. It allows Dora to talk to her technicians. Thomas can then update the service call as he goes through it, and he can send information back to Dora that Dora can use. ExpandIT set up that works on the web, so as long as you have internet capability, you will be able to use this product. Now, from time to time, the Tech Thomas may lose his internet capability if he goes into an area with poor service or whatever. That's not a problem. He can still update on his whatever he's using, a tablet or a smartphone or whatever. When the internet connectivity comes back to his machine, it will then update back to the ExpandIT database. So when Dora comes into ExpandIT, she will see a screen like this. Basically, she's going to do most of her work during the day in ExpandIT, and most of the work that she's going to do in the ExpandIT will be in the planning board. We showed you an example of Dora creating a service call inside of the service product in Business Central. She can also create a service call inside ExpandIT. So she doesn't have to jump back and forth. Oh, I got to create a call. I got to go back and do service. Now that I've got the call, I've got to plan and go forward in ExpandIT. So one of the most important things that Dora is going to do is she's going to go in what we call the dispatch board. So you can see here that this is going to be a list of all the calls that have been assigned to the technicians. So you can see Peter has one, Richard has two, Timothy has two, and Annette down here has another one. One of the other things that we can do is we can assign calls based on the dimensions. So rather than assign a call to Peter or Richard, we could assign a call to the area of Service Central, in which case it would be showing in the dispatch board under Service Central, but wouldn't have a specific technician assigned to it. Dora, at that point, when she's got to the point where she can assign it, she could just drag and drop it from the Service Central area into whatever technician she wants to do the work. You can filter the dispatch board. As you can see here, they've filtered the dispatch board by days. If you wanted to see a wider view, you could see a monthly view if there was something that you needed to look at. You can also filter it to the areas that are specific to you. So if you're a dispatcher of Dora was only responsible for Service C, Service Central, and another dispatcher was responsible for Service Eastern, she could modify the view so that she only sees what's relevant to her. So this will be the key as she does her day-to-day work. So one of the things that you can do in there is if you take your mouse and you go over any of the service calls, it will give you a little bit of information, but you can also double click on it and you can get all the information for that particular work order coming from Business Central. So in this case, you can see the same work order number that we had over in Business Central, the same customer, the same product. But you will see a couple of little things at the bottom here that I'm going to explain to you. They're called planning lines. So Dora can put planning lines of material or labor for this particular work order if she wants to give the tech a little bit of help. So if she knows that this particular hot tub always has a specific filter cartridge and generally is sold to the customer when they do the work, she can put in a line that will designate and say one case. She can also put an estimate of hours here. So she's put an estimate of 4 hours. Now this is it's not locked in stone. The technician will go through and Thomas will either select this or not select it based on the work that he's doing at the time. It makes things a little easier if Dora's always aware that they always sell a filter cartridge, or more than 50% of the time or 70% of the time they sell this filter cartridge. She could put it on there to help Thomas later on, and I'll show you later on how that comes. The other thing with resources in Business Central, they're generally going to be technicians, but they don't have to be. If you have something that you also schedule, for example, a bulldozer, you only have one of them and you use it on a lot of different work orders, you can create that as a resource and then you can manage that as well. So it doesn't have to be a person. You can manage whatever you want to manage. Now, if Thomas had a truck and it's always Thomas's truck, you're probably not going to create a resource called truck because we know it's always with Thomas. But, if there was a boom truck, for example, that would be probably a very good thing to create a resource for and to manage it. So if you can put in a work order, it does not have to be assigned to a technician. And also, as we were talking about, doesn't have to be necessarily assigned to a dimension area. So here's an example. You would click on the schedule new visit and the work orders would come up and you would then select the work order and you would select who you want to assign it to. If it's not been assigned to anything, it doesn't show up on the dispatch board until you actually make a schedule a visit. The other thing that's nice about it is that ExpandIT will show you map information on the technicians and the service calls that are going to be done based on the filter on your dispatch board. So if you had an emergency call come up, you might want to look at where your technicians are. Say, for example, it came up in Barrie, your closest technician looks like they're in Collingwood. So you might want to see if that technician can go over and do that emergency work order. So now, what does Thomas see? This is what Thomas sees when he first logs into his ExpandIT. So this is what he's showing or seeing on his tablet, on his smartphone, however he's logging into ExpandIT. The first thing Thomas will do in the morning is he will log in. Thomas will see all the service calls that have been assigned to him on this particular day. And as you can see, there's an arrow. He could go forward if he needed to. So at this point, the only thing that's been assigned to Thomas is this particular service call here. You can also see something up here. Now, this is kind of optional, but you can see what's called an order pool. So if Thomas was finished his work at 10 o'clock, he could actually go in and see the unassigned appointments that are sitting in ExpandIT. And he could then talk to Dora and say, Dora, I see there's one that's just 3 miles away here. I can handle that if you want. Of course, then it's up to Dora whether she would say yes or no. So basically, when Thomas looks at his system, there is a variety of tech buttons there that's going to be at the bottom of his screen. And we'll go into each one of these: call, detail, tasks, time, materials, forms, and attachments. And we'll go through and we'll talk about each one. One of the things that Thomas can do during the call is he can start updating the status that is for that particular call. When he updates the status, it will update the dispatch board to give Dora a little bit more information. So this information is color-coded. If you remember when we first showed you ExpandIT, we had a series of colors. It's not editable, but it will tell Dora just by looking at the dispatch board where Thomas is on this particular call. When Thomas goes into the planning tab, Thomas will see all the information on this particular service call. He's going to see any internal comments that made their description of what the problem is. You can see there are internal comments, and though it's cut off a little bit, there are invoice comments. And the invoice comments are something that would appear on an invoice. And of course, the internal comments is something that you wouldn't normally expose to the customer, for whatever reason. So Thomas would click on his Start Travel button to record travel time. So you can see here we have Start Travel. If he has travel time, some businesses charge for travel time, other businesses don't charge for travel time. But in this case, Thomas is charging for travel time, so he's going to click on the Start Travel button. And that will start the work order time. Thomas can pause it if he needs to, for whatever reason. If he's driving along and he gets a call and he's got to be on the phone talking to Dora for 20 minutes, and he doesn't feel that that's fair to charge the customer for because it's revolving around another customer, he can put it on pause. One of the things that you can do is you can edit the time. So even though Thomas has started his travel time, he can change the travel time if he needs to. Can also change the billable time in his service call, or sorry, his work order that we'll get to later, and I'll show you that. So he's not locked in just because it's there. He doesn't have to use it if he doesn't want to. One of the other things that ExpandIT has is the ability to then take that billable time and modify it even further if needed. So you can see here, Thomas, on this example, has 4 hours of billable time, and he could just leave it as billable time, or he could put maybe 2 hours as non-billable and 1 hour as overtime. This allows him to modify his time based on what he's doing at that point. So after he's done his time, he would then attach the material that's been used. So as you can see up here, we had a planned material, one case. So rather than Thomas having to go and find that particular cartridge in a long list, he can just use it and say, yes, we used one case, or no, we didn't use one case. You don't have to use it. You could use something else if you needed to. So this, again, like I said, Dora is just putting it on there to make it a little easier for Thomas when he's doing his work. One of the very, very strong features of ExpandIT is their forms. So what is a form? A form basically can be anything that you need it to be. So you may have a form that gets set up and is specific to a customer. So the tech, Thomas, must go through that form before he goes on site. It could also be a form that's specific to a piece of equipment. You know, this piece of equipment, we need to have these 5 meter readings. It's very easy to set up forms. When we have customers, we set up a couple for them and they set up the rest. You know, you really can't default forms too much because every single industry and every single company would have different requirements of forms. You can have one form or you can have many forms on a particular service order. You could also have whether the form is required or not. So there are some forms that, hey, you must do this. You must complete this form in order to complete this work order. And then there are other forms that are optional. Once this form is completed, it is then stored in the ExpandIT database and can be made available in SharePoint sites. Same with attachments. So you can take pictures and do attachments of what you find there. You know, again, an attachment could be anything that you need it to be. Typically, as I said, it'd probably be a picture. This is a before picture. This is an after picture. Again, that will be stored in the ExpandIT database and will be available on SharePoint. So when the work's done, Thomas can get a signature. Again, signature is stored in ExpandIT and can be available in SharePoint. And that's I just put an example here, but again, work orders are always customized. You know, this just shows you what could be there. We have things like problem codes, the issues the tech could put in there, resolution codes, servicing notes. You know, we suggest that you look at replacing this in the next 6 to 9 months because it's going to break again. So when Thomas is done, he can then take a look at everything on his work order, and he can then put it to the status of waiting to approve. So he's saying, I'm done with it. Let's put it in the queue for approval. Okay, this is where Sean comes in. So Sean, the service manager, is going to have a approve work order screen. So Sean can go in here and he can take a look at each of these work orders that has a status of awaiting approval. he can modify those work orders. So he could take a look at the work order and he could say, 6 hours to do this work is not really realistic. I'm going to move it down to 4 hours. You can also see, I can't understand why he could do this without adding this material. So he could add the material, or he could check with the tech Thomas and then add the material. Once he's done with making the adjustments, he can then approve it. So this is one of the keys. When you approve a work order, you can no longer change it and expand it. So once Sean has said, this is the final work order, it can't be modified and expanded. Can still be modified, and we'll talk about this, it can still be modified in service if needed. But one of the disadvantages of modifying in service, if Dora needs to change it, is now what is in expanded will be a disconnect from what is in service. If you need to do it, you need to do it. You just need to be aware that, the information is going to be different. So once the product has been approved, once the work order has been approved, it will come back into Dora. Dora will do a final check. Dora will make any adjustments, hopefully none, and then she will ship and invoice the customer. So basically, this might be Dora's function. This might be an accounting function, but depending on the size of the company, we're just going to say Dora does it, and she invoices the customer and sends them that invoice. So you can see this can happen very quickly. You could go and do a service call. Thomas updates the service call. He's on there. Sean approves the service call at 2:00. Dora gets the information back into her system. She approves it, and she invoices potentially on the same day. Now, obviously, sometimes that would be shorter. Sometimes that would be longer. And that's a day in the life of a service company with Dora, Thomas, and Sean.